Dawn on Guadalcanal.
Here, on Guadalcanal, thousands of men learned that victory was not just about firepower, but about the will to endure.
The jungle goes silent, then erupts. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers sprint uphill in a tidal roar of steel and voices. Sergeant James McKinley shoulders a weapon the Corps nearly mothballed. A World War I trench shotgun. 5 shells in the tube. 9 pellets per blast. No one expects this museum piece to decide a modern fight. But when the charge crashes inside 50 yards, the jungle turns into a funnel, and the old pump gun becomes a wall of thunder. What follows doesn't just stop one attack. It forces the Marines to rethink close combat from the ground up. If you love hidden battlefield upgrades and hard-won lessons, stick around and subscribe so you don't miss the untold truth of the trench gun. The ridge looked harmless at first light. Mist clung to the mahogany trunks, and the valley below breathed steam like a sleeping animal. Sergeant James McKinley checked the lanes his squad had cut in the night. Thin tunnels through leaves that barely reached 50 yards before turning to green walls. Everyone knew the rule here. If a fight came, it would come close. That was the problem. The rifles they trusted were built for distance. The jungle was not. Across the line, Marines kept stealing glances at the pump shotguns slung beside them. 5 shells in the tube. Heavy, stubby, ugly. Most had trained to baby their rifles, polish sights, count breath, squeeze clean. The shotgun asked for something different. Point, rack, fire again. No romance, just thunder. The first warning was silence. Birds cut off mid-chatter. Insects faded like someone turned a dial. McKinley lifted his hand, and the squad slid lower behind logs and root folds. Then the sound arrived. One long roar of voices, rolling toward them like surf. A banzai rush. Not a wild mob, but a planned sprint. Loose spacing, bayonets forward, satchel carriers tucked behind the first wave. They would cross 200 yards in little more than a minute. If they reached the line, luck would decide who lived. Inside 200, Harrison called, calm in a way 19-year-olds should not be. McKinley felt the weight of the shotgun in his hands. He had hated it in training. He feared it now. But the jungle did not care about feelings. It did not give space for careful aim. At 100 yards, the green swallowed most of the charge. The terrain squeezed the enemy into 3 natural corridors, just wide enough for a handful of men. That funnel, the one that always made riflemen feel trapped, suddenly looked like an advantage. McKinley shifted 2 Marines to overlap their lanes, told Daniels to own the side path, and kept Harrison on the main trail. Inside 50, McKinley flicked the safety. The first attacker burst through vine and leaf at 40 yards, eyes wide, mouth open on a battle cry. McKinley pressed the trigger. The blast punched the air, louder than any rifle crack. The lead man folded, and the 2 beside him crumpled as if yanked by wire. McKinley worked the pump by reflex and fired again at a muzzle flash he could barely see. Leaves shredded. A second figure dropped. Down the trail, Harrison's shotgun boomed in a steady rhythm. Fire, rack, top off 2 shells, fire again. The lane filled with splinters and smoke. Ricocheting pellets bit around trunks, finding men who thought wood would save them. On the flank, Daniels waited until 6 figures bunched at a bend, then sent 2 quick blasts that erased the knot and the momentum behind it. What used to be a long, shaky minute of rifle shots turned into seconds of controlled violence. The charge stumbled, broke, and scattered before it ever reached bayonet distance. McKinley realized the jungle had not changed. They had. The last 50 yards finally belonged to the defenders. The old pump was no museum piece. In this place, on this morning, It was the right tool, the only one that made the jungle listen. In the quiet that followed, the Marines stared at smoking barrels like they were seeing ghosts. A few weeks earlier, most of them would have traded the old pump guns for scrap. They were issued rifles for a reason, they'd been told. Range, precision, magazine capacity. The trench gun had been a dusty memory from another war, something built for muddy European trenches, not tropical jungles. Yet on Guadalcanal, the thick trees and tangled roots didn't care about doctrine. They swallowed sight lines, bent bullets, and turned every firefight into a knife fight in slow motion. Suddenly, the weapon nobody wanted was the one keeping them alive. Word spread through the regiment faster than official reports ever could. Marines whispered about pellets curving around obstacles, of pellets striking 3 men at once, of attackers dropping so fast they never got their bayonets up. It wasn't magic, it was physics suited to terrain. Where rifles demanded you find a clean shot, the shotgun made its own. Branches that deflected long-range rounds simply scattered the spray, widening the cone into lethal confetti. The jungle amplified chaos, and the pump gun thrived on chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Pearson noticed the transformation. After months of reading casualty lists from banzai assaults, he had gambled on reissuing the forgotten scatter guns. Now he studied the aftermath. No friendly deaths, wounded enemies unable to fight on, defenders able to reload between surges. But there was a cost. Each Marine carried only 25 shells. Each tube held just 5 at a time. And against a determined rush, 5 blasts vanished quicker than courage. So Pearson pushed training changes. Marines learned to top off constantly. Fire twice, load 1, fire again. They practiced racking the action blindfolded, in mud, under simulated panic. Daniels drilled his men to move between logs as they pumped, using the short weapon to fire while shifting positions, something a longer rifle fumbled to do. Harrison discovered that with muscle memory, his shotgun rhythm became as natural as breathing. Still, resentment lingered. Riflemen mocked the lack of range. They grumbled about awkward shells and swollen wooden stocks. But every time the jungle tightened, every time the enemy appeared at spitting distance, the shotgun proved why it belonged. These Marines weren't fighting textbook battles. They were wrestling in green darkness, where seconds decided everything, and noise alone could freeze an attacker's spirit. The old trench gun was no longer outdated. It was evolving, because the battlefield had. Japanese officers noticed the change immediately. Patrols reported Americans firing something that felt like thunder at arm's length. Soldiers who once pushed confidently into foliage now slowed, unsure if any cover would protect them. The shotgun's spread turned jungle brush into a trap. Where rifles demanded clean sight lines, these short weapons simply blasted through leaves, bark, and branches, shredding anything behind them. For Marines, the difference was almost spiritual. Before shotguns appeared, night watch meant clenched teeth and twitching nerves. Banzai attacks arrived like storms, and even a wounded enemy could reach your foxhole with a bayonet. Now, with a pump gun resting nearby, defenders felt anchored. At under 50 yards, aim mattered less than instinct and timing. The weapon built for trenches found a new purpose, where visibility disappeared and angles vanished. Pearson's after-action notes showed a stunning trend. Hit consistency soared. A single shell scattered 9 projectiles wide enough to strike multiple attackers or punish someone hiding behind a tree. Brush that once deflected bullets now helped spread the pattern. Ricochet effects turned narrow trails into kill funnels. Some Marines swore pellets curved into places they never aimed, but what mattered was the same outcome. Charges stopped cold. However, The shotgun's roar betrayed every position. Rifles whispered, pumps boomed, and shells were heavy. A Marine could pack far more rifle rounds than 12-gauge cartridges. Extended patrols meant choosing between firepower and endurance. Still, the stopping power was undeniable. Rifle wounds slowed enemies. Shotgun hits halted them instantly. Harrison saw a charging soldier take a rifle round and keep swinging. Another took a single blast of buckshot and folded like a puppet with its strings cut. The jungle began to feel different, less like a predator's maze and more like ground the Marines could shape. Instead of bracing for impact, they hunted lanes and angles, learning to fire on movement rather than perfect targets. The enemy's greatest tactic, shock, screaming speed, bayonet terror, was losing its edge. For the first time, American defenders didn't just survive rushes. They broke them, mentally and physically. And deep in the green maze of Guadalcanal, a weapon older than many Marines became the unexpected answer to modern war. Word of the shotgun's sudden dominance spread through the division, and soon every platoon wanted one. But the battlefield always finds a weakness. As the rainy season swept in, humidity clung to everything. Moisture crept into actions, swelled wooden stocks, and made metal sweat. Shotguns that had boomed flawlessly during dry engagements began to hiccup. Shells stuck in chambers, extractors slipped, pumps jammed mid-stroke. And in the jungle, a single jam could mean a bayonet in the ribs. Harrison was the first to notice the pattern. It wasn't neglect, it was environment. The lubrication that kept rifles smooth turned into mud magnets inside shotguns. Too much oil and debris built a paste. Too little, and the pump dragged like sandpaper. Marines found themselves stripping weapons after every patrol, improvising drying racks, and rubbing components with wax, motor oil, even grease stolen from vehicle crews. Corporal Daniels became the unofficial gunsmith. He studied which parts rusted first, which springs lost tension, and how to clean everything with the least amount of water. His fixes violated manuals, but saved lives. Soon, squads across the ridge whispered requests for his help. The shotgun had proven its worth, but now demanded maintenance discipline rivaling aircraft engines. Ammunition suffered too. Cardboard hulls soaked moisture and lost internal pressure. Pellets sputtered out weak and short. Some shells popped like firecrackers instead of thunder, forcing Marines to double tap when they couldn't risk guessing. The psychological shift cut both ways. Marines had finally felt the confidence of overwhelming close-range fire. Now each small malfunction chipped at that trust. McKinley caught his squad staring longer at their pumps before patrols, second-guessing their gear. To counter this, Daniels introduced a rotation system, one shotgun resting dry, one in use. The extra weight slowed them, but morale improved. Nobody wanted to pull the trigger and hear only a hollow click. Even with these setbacks, casualty reports told the truth. Shotgun-equipped squads still outperformed rifle-only units, ending fights faster and with fewer wounded. The environment was punishing everything, not just trench guns. Helmets rusted, boots rotted, and even radios fizzled under constant rain. Guadalcanal reminded them all, the jungle never gave advantages freely. If you wanted a weapon to dominate here, you had to fight the island itself just to keep it firing. 2 years later, the battlefield changed again. Jungle canopies gave way to volcanic ash and the black beaches of Iwo Jima. Gone were the wide, leafy funnels that helped channel attackers. Instead, Marines faced a labyrinth of reinforced bunkers and tunnels carved deep into the rock. The enemy no longer sprinted in screaming waves. They waited underground, patient and silent. close-quarters fighting wasn't an occasional terror. It was the mission. McKinley felt his pulse thump through the stock of his shotgun as his squad approached their first tunnel entrance. The air blew hot and stale from the opening, carrying the metallic tang of old explosions. Rifles had trouble here, their length snagged on walls and corners, but the pump guns slid through the cramped passageways like they'd been made for them. The first blast inside a concrete corridor was deafening. Sound slammed back into the Marines, rattling teeth and shaking vision, but it did worse to the defenders. Shockwaves bounced around the tunnel, stunning enemy soldiers before pellets even struck. After the recoil settled, McKinley saw 2 Japanese troops slumped against the wall, eyes dazed, weapons still at their hips. Not every encounter was easy. The ash outside ground into pump rails, forming abrasive sludge. Sulfur in the air corroded steel faster than jungle humidity ever did. After one firefight, Harrison cycled his gun and winced at the gritty rasp. If moisture crippled the shotgun, volcanic grit tried to kill it. To break through steel-reinforced embrasures, Marines requested hardened buckshot and breaching rounds, fewer pellets, more punch. At 3 yards, they punched through barriers that standard rounds merely dented. And deeper in the tunnels, ricochets became unpredictable. Skipping along walls and bouncing into side chambers, Marines couldn't see. But the psychological weight of the weapon grew heavier. Defenders trapped in a concrete choke point had nowhere to run. One blast could decide a room. The ancient trench weapon, built for muddy France, was suddenly reborn in underground Japan. Casualty reports for shotgun teams were shockingly low. They cleared positions faster, missed fewer threats, and forced enemy fighters to either surrender or flee deeper into the maze, where visibility favored American speed. Iwo Jima wasn't the jungle's fight. It was the trench gun's legacy coming full circle, proving that sometimes the oldest tools still had the sharpest edge. Success breeds demand, and soon there weren't enough trench guns to go around. Units who'd never seen close-quarters fighting begged headquarters for a handful. But scarcity wasn't the only problem. The more Marines relied on the shotgun, the more its hidden flaws surfaced. Volcanic grit chewed pump rails, tropical mold swelled wooden stocks, and constant maintenance ate into sleep cycles. A weapon that saved lives also demanded energy Marines barely had. Pearson pushed his staff to collect data. They compared casualty reports between rifle squads and shotgun squads in jungle and tunnel engagements. The numbers were stark. Shotgun teams lost fewer men and finished fights faster. Headquarters approved more allocations, but faster than supply lines could deliver them. Logistics officers scrambled to find enough 12-gauge shells, while ammo ships prioritized standard rifle rounds. Shell shortages forced Marine squads to ration fire, using rifles for distance and saving the pump only when walls closed in. Enemy adaptation came next. Japanese defenders built longer tunnels, curved corners to deflect pellets, and set ambushes beyond the shotgun's reach. But Marines learned faster. Daniels experimented with firing angles, skipping pellets off bunker walls like billiard shots. Harrison favored short, sharp bursts, topping off constantly rather than shooting dry. McKinley drilled his squad to advance between shots, using the weapon's shocking blast to steal ground inch by inch. Morale, strangely, became the shotgun's greatest ally. A Marine with a pump felt like he owned the last 10 yards of earth in front of him. That mattered when tunnels felt like coffins and nerves frayed from darkness. Confidence is currency in combat. The shotgun paid interest. Still, the weapon took a toll. Hearing damage became common. Marines staggered out of tunnels, half-deaf, shouting orders they couldn't hear themselves. Navy corpsmen treated blast wounds on both sides of the barrel, shrapnel, ruptured eardrums, and concussive trauma. The shotgun solved war quickly, but it left echoes. By campaign's end, command accepted an uncomfortable truth. No single weapon fit every fight. Rifles owned distance. Grenades owned rooms. But when the jungle tightened or the earth became a maze, the pump-action shotgun turned panic into control. Marines adapted because they had no choice. Firepower wasn't just about velocity. It was about terrain, psychology, and timing. The trench gun endured not because it was perfect, but because it was brutally honest. It worked where nothing else could. And in the Pacific, that was enough to rewrite doctrine. By the final months of the Pacific Campaign, something subtle but profound had changed in the way Marines behaved under pressure. The trench gun no longer felt like an emergency tool. It became a strategic anchor, something squads actively built their battles around. McKinley noticed it first in the way patrol leaders chose ground. Instead of avoiding narrow jungle funnels out of fear, they sought them out. A tight bend meant fewer angles of approach. A fallen log could force attackers into a single file. Where rifles demanded open space, the pump-action shotgun owned compression. In after-action briefings, Marines described their movements differently too. Instead of hunkering down and waiting for the rush, they advanced during gaps in enemy movement. Shotguns turned defense into offense. The short cycling motion of the pump punished hesitation. Marines learned to fire, step, rack, and fire again, creeping forward like a tide. Each blast made attackers flinch, buying precious feet of ground. Rifles might tag a single soldier. Shotguns erased clusters. Even the enemy noticed behavioral shifts. Captured documents warned Japanese troops not to engage Americans in tight terrain, an impossible order in island labyrinths. Tunnel defenders reported that the sound alone, the booming blast followed by the metallic pump, triggered panic. Some units described hearing the rhythm in their nightmares. They began abandoning advantageous positions the moment the shotgun barked inside a bunker, knowing the next blast might curve around a corner. Pearson's tactical assessments reflected the change. Shotgun squads finished close engagements 40% faster and lost fewer men. Their aggression forced Japanese fighters deeper into tunnels, where grenades and flame barrages waited. The trench gun wasn't merely ending fights, it was shaping where the fights happened. Morale followed. Marines with shotguns walked point more willingly. Younger troops gravitated toward the weapon like a superstition, believing it granted control of the final 50 yards, the most lethal stretch of Pacific combat. And there was something else, quieter. Confidence against fear. Where bayonet charges once felt inevitable, now Marines believed they could stop them cold. Confidence didn't just keep men alive on paper. It stabilized shaking hands, steadied breathing, and quieted panic before it grew teeth. Behind the front line, improvisation exploded. Sergeants swapped tips on angles. Corporals debated pellet spread patterns like professors. Some Marines filed slight bevels into pump handles for faster cycling at awkward wrist angles. Others carved notches in their stocks to index aim in darkness. These weren't gimmicks. They were hard-earned refinements, born in places where darkness felt alive. The shotgun, primitive on a blueprint, became a precision tool in practiced hands. By late 1945, close-quarters doctrine across the division looked nothing like it had on arrival. The weapon had not just altered tactics. It had changed the culture of close combat, turning the last yards of the battlefield from pure terror into something Marines could dominate by skill, rhythm, and brutal efficiency. And in a war defined by islands and tunnels, that shift meant survival. When the war finally ended, The trench gun didn't receive medals, headlines, or a place in grand strategy briefings. It simply returned to armories and crates, overshadowed by aircraft, tanks, and large-scale maneuvers. But the Marines who carried it remembered. They remembered how it turned chaos into control, how it bought seconds that separated life from death, and how it changed the psychology of close-quarters battle. Modern instructors quietly folded its lessons into doctrine. Dominate the last 50 yards, keep ammunition topped off, and never treat confined terrain like open field. McKinley went home without fanfare, working a quiet job and never saying much about tunnels, jungle funnels, or the thunder of buckshot echoing off stone. Yet every Marine who trains in room clearing, urban entry, or narrow terrain engagement unknowingly inherits the wisdom of those who fought with pump-action steel. Its legacy survived not through museums, but through habits. Thousands of lives saved by a weapon many historians forget.